Namaste and welcome to India Global Week 2020, Be the Revival, India and a Better New World. I'm your host, Priyanka Deo, reporting live from New Delhi. We've had some fabulous panel discussions and guests here today, and that's going to continue. Now, I'm super excited, as Manoj said in his video. This is truly India's global platform where we can exchange ideas and turn it into something impactful. And I think the numbers show it. I'm super delighted to announce that we have over 10,000 registered attendees from 69 countries. That's absolutely huge, and it's a pleasure to host this conference and meet all of you. With that being said, on India Incorp throughout, that's India INCORP on Twitter. And use the hashtag #BeTheRevival if you're posting up pictures, if you have any questions, if you have your thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. So please do that. With that being said, let's dive right into our next session. This one's called The Next Mining Boom, Rise of Australia's Critical Minerals. And the discussion will focus on the potential of critical minerals, engagement between Australia and India, and how this could usher a new economic opportunity between both nations. With that being said, I'd like to invite the moderator of the session, Mr. John Madew, the head of Mining and Resources of the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, to introduce the panel and begin the discussion. Mr. Madew, namaste, and the stage is all yours.
Thanks so much, Priyanka, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to the India Global Week 2020 Australia stream. I'm John Madew, moderating this session, and I head the Mining and Resources team for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, the official trade and investment promotion agency of the Australian government. It's really fantastic to be part of this session today, as I've recently completed a 4-year posting in India, based both in Delhi and Mumbai. So this combines topics from both my past and my present. Stoked to be working with this great panel to discuss the topic of the next mining boom, the rise of Australia's critical minerals. And critical minerals really have become a strategic geopolitical issue that governments and business just cannot ignore. Essential for manufacture and operations of technologies from batteries and mobile phones to wind turbines, access, control, and continuity of supply to critical minerals such as rare earth elements, lithium, and cobalt will become a pressing issue into the future. India's rise as a technology and manufacturing hub means that businesses across the country will be keen to lock in supply of critical minerals to drive industry as well as green technology. Australia is well known as one of the world's leading suppliers of iron ore, coal, gold, bauxite, copper, zinc, lead, manganese, and a number of other commodities. But Australia also holds large resources or has potential for significant resources of many of the critical minerals that the world needs. Australia, therefore, is well placed to be a supplier of these critical minerals to world markets. I'm sure it was with this in mind that our two prime ministers signed a critical minerals memorandum of understanding at last month's comprehensive strategic partnership talks. So to explore this topic further, I'd like to introduce our three eminent panelists and invite them to make opening comments. Firstly, Dr. Vanessa Guthrie is an experienced executive director with a career spanning 30 years in the resources sector. Vanessa has qualifications in geology, environment, law, and business management that includes a PhD in geology. She was awarded an Honorary Doctor of Science from Curtin University in 2017 for her contribution to sustainability, innovation, and policy leadership in the resources sector. Vanessa is on the board of a number of organizations, including listed companies Santos, Adelaide Brighton Limited, Tronox Holdings, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and Curtin University, where she's Pro Vice Chancellor, and the Western Australian Cricket Association, where she's Deputy Chair. She's an active member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, Chief Executive Women, and a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. Vanessa's contribution to the mining industry has been recognised both in Australia and globally, including being recognised as one of the world's top 100 list of inspirational women in mining. I'd like to invite Vanessa to make some opening remarks. Vanessa.
Thank you, John, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. I was really pleased to be asked to comment on critical minerals and the rise of critical minerals and its importance between our two countries. And I'd like to frame my opening comments around the perspective from Australian mining companies in engaging in the critical mineral space. There have been in the past 3 conventional ways in which Australian mining companies have engaged in India, as they have elsewhere offshore. It's either been through direct investment into mining tenements and leases in India. It's been through bringing Indian partners into operations in Australia, or it's been by providing services through the METS, the Mining Equipment Technology and Services companies, to Indian mining and minerals processing. Those 3 approaches have not enjoyed great success, and in some cases, one might say we've seen some spectacular failures in that. And it would be fair to say that Australian mining companies are resistant to entering the Indian market these days because they have a sense that it's quite difficult to do business. It's too difficult, it's too slow, and it doesn't meet our timeframes. But I have a different view to that conventional approach. On the back of the MOU signed between our two countries recently, I believe that we have a 4th way to grow the value between our two countries in critical minerals. That is to take a fresh approach that aligns with the India Economic Strategy of 2018 for Australia and with the approach from Prime Minister Modi around self-reliance in India. And that is that we work together based on our strengths. So Australia's great strength is in mining and mining exports. India's growing strength and great strength has been in manufacturing and manufacturing hubs. So by partnering together down the value chain, we have an opportunity to grow value for both our countries and then leverage on those strengths between each other for Australia to grow its advanced manufacturing hub and for India to grow its mining production. One of the lessons that we've learned out of coronavirus has been that self-reliance overcomes the security risk in our supply chains. And for critical minerals in both India and Australia, this is no different to where it has been elsewhere. So I think as we discuss the importance of critical minerals going forward to both our economies, I'd encourage us all to think more broadly about how we might do business together in a way that generates value for both countries on the basis of playing to our strengths in Australia, which is mining and mining services and exporting of resources, because we are rich in resources, and in a way that plays to India's great strengths in terms of both its demand in its economy, but also in its ability to, in its manufacturing approach. And I liken it, as I always would, to a great cricket team. A great cricket team has fantastic fast and spin bowlers, it has outstanding opening bats, and it has all-rounders. And playing to our strengths between our two countries is actually like winning a World Cup by using our strengths to improve our performance across the board. So with that, I'll leave it with that. Thank you, John, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good cricket analogy is always good for Australia and India. Our second speaker I'd like to introduce is Dr. Rajesh Chadha. Rajesh is Program Director for Natural Resources at Brookings, India. He was formerly a Professor and Research Director at National Council for Applied Economic Research in India. He has worked extensively on international trade issues, foreign direct investment, and agricultural markets. He's been a visiting scholar at the universities of Michigan, Melbourne, as well as Monash in Melbourne, and a visiting faculty at many prestigious institutes in India. He was nominated as a GTAP Research Fellow by Global Trade Analysis Project, Purdue University in the US, and he received his PhD in economics from IIT Delhi. I'd like to invite Rajesh to give some opening remarks. Rajesh. I can't hear Rajesh. I'm not sure whether anyone else can.
I'm sorry. I think I was listening to you and it was muted. Yeah.
There we go. You're on now, Rajesh.
So thanks very much, John, and thanks to the India Inc. for inviting me to this important discussion. I would like to take the views that Vanessa has expressed a little forward, and we have been, interestingly, even pre-COVID era, we were in discussion with Australia at Brookings, India, regarding critical minerals. There was a visit by Miss Nicole Ruque from Mineral Research Institute in November 9. And then we also met with Mr. Sean Kelly, Miss Helen Mitchell, and Dr. Jane Golay during the visit of the Western Australia Premier in November. So we have been in discussion regarding the critical minerals even before this MOU got set up. I think one of the important things that Vanessa has mentioned, that it is the complementarities that matter, and complementarities can be in terms of either investing in India or India investing in Australia. And the other complementarity is obviously learning from what Australia has done as a successful mining country. If I look at the Fraser Index, where India has been dropped out during the last two times, just because I'm hearing my echo. Anybody else is?
No.
Okay, so I think there was some echo. So what I would like to emphasize is that since Australia is already an excellent mining jurisdiction as per the Fraser Index, India has a lot to gain from, a lot to learn from Australia in various ways, to which we'll come during discussions. The worry at the moment is that it is now quite well documented that the global supply chains of critical minerals, including lithium, cobalt, titanium, and rare earths, is heavily skewed, and there are monopolies in most of these critical minerals, where you have China dominating in rare earths, and cobalt coming from Congo, and so on and so forth. So I think it is time post-COVID that we need to learn, even though we were in discussion with Australia earlier. I think it is time to take the steps forward, the way we can bilaterally gain to maximize the critical minerals supply to India, as well as learning about critical minerals from what Australia has been doing. Remember the two, why I talk about the critical mineral security as far as India is concerned. I am reminded of 2010, when China had stopped exports of critical minerals to Japan, and there was a major price hike. And later, the natural disasters can also spoil the mineral availability. For example, Xalic, a mineral which was produced only by one company on the east coast of Japan, post tsunami had a serious impact on the metallic car paints for Ford, Volkswagen, BMW, Toyota, etc. So spreading it over at various different areas is obviously important. The 21st century needs of clean energy and high tech for India are extremely important. And India has very clearly put it as a reform package. This was prior to the June 4 bilateral summit of the two prime ministers of Australia and India, that the Indian Prime Minister declared a major package of stimulus post-COVID reforms. And it has been discussed that incentives shall be provided for new champion sectors, which include manufacturing of solar panels, batteries, and high-tech equipment, including defense, aircraft maintenance, civil aviation, IT equipment, etc. And I think the good thing that I would like to mention is that the last 3 months have seen a major set of reforms that mining industry in India. So Vanessa, I understand where you are coming from, that the companies were not successful, but there is a major set of reforms which I can discuss during the follow-up discussion. And finally, it reminds me of the wonderful report that Peter Varghese had written in April 2018 on India economic strategy to 2035. And he very clearly said our mineral resources relationship will continue to be dominated by exports rather than outbound Australian investment. But he also mentioned that India is one of the most important future markets for METS, that is mining equipment, technology, and services. I think I'd like to, we already have firms like Mineral Technologies, Orica, Taga, and Losugen, and some of the companies that are playing as far as METS in India is concerned. However, I think the narrative of that story can change now with the kind of mineral reform deficit that was there when this report was written in 2018 versus what is happening now. So ongoing reforms can be a game changer, and new investments are greatly welcome to India, not only in METS, but I think we will discuss about exploration and extraction in particular. And what better than to learn from Australia, who is on the top list of Fraser list, as well as the other mining jurisdictions when we compare. I think I'll stop here for the time being and then discuss later when you ask some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh, and we really look forward to hearing more about the reforms into the mining sector in India in the discussion. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce our final speaker. Joe Katarevec is the CEO and Executive Director of CobaltBlue Holdings. He commenced his career in the Royal Australian Air Force as an engineering officer before transitioning into PricewaterhouseCoopers, overseeing global resources engagements. Over the last 20 years, he's been involved in equities and investment research, including senior roles with Deutsche Bank and Five Oceans Asset Management, which was focused on mining, minerals processing, and energy storage. Most recently, Joe held an international consulting role with a focus on renewable energies and battery storage technologies. Joe is an engineer with qualifications from University of Sydney. He's got an MBA from Deakin and is also a chartered financial analyst. Joe, would you like to make some opening remarks, please?
Yes, thank you, John, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel in such esteemed companies. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all. My answers, and not just in this opening section, but throughout the panel, will tend to be through a lens of a commercial and industry participants rather than as one who is necessarily entrenched in the policy side of things. My background, as you've mentioned, in our company is involved in the battery materials space. So again, I'll tend to answer these questions through that lens. I think fundamentally the transition between our two countries must depend on understanding each other's needs. And in the critical materials space, that's important because in the battery space in particular, the downstream needs, the needs of the consumer and the needs of industry are evolving at a very, very rapid clip. The technology that today is applicable, for example, in electric vehicles or in energy storage and the like, will not be the technology that will be incumbent in the next 10 to 15 years. So the products today will certainly be a marked difference to the products of tomorrow. Lithium, cobalt, and even nickel sulfate as a subset of those critical materials are not terminally traded. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because they're not terminally traded minerals, it's very difficult to understand what the end company specifications are or demand specifications are. They tend to be closely held specs, and therefore it's very difficult for emerging Australian companies to understand what is the product I need to be selling to this market. And then you overlay that with the fact the market is evolving at a rapid pace, it's very difficult to bring that into production. From our side, it's also difficult because these aren't terminally traded products, and therefore one can't hedge forward as a producer in the space. The only way to get into production as a producer of these materials is to get a company-to-company contract. That means we need to reach out to Indian consumers, to Indian manufacturers, and establish relationships very early in our development and understand what it is they need, what specification. Importantly, purity plays a big part in this, and ultimately create offtake arrangements that are beneficial for both parties. Just by way of, to give you some example of how small some of these markets are, and I'll give an example from my own industry, from cobalt. The entire cobalt industry globally today is only around 120,000, 130,000 tonne of metal. Now that, by way of example, would fit into one bulk carrier, one Cape-sized bulk carrier in the iron ore field. So that shows you how small the market is, and then the fact that it isn't terminally traded as an intermediary between producer and consumer also highlights the opacity of the market. I do believe that understanding each other's needs as Australians, us progressing down the value chain, as Indians come up the value chain, is an important part of overcoming the burdens of development. From our side, as producers, we can develop large quantities of high purity products going into these markets. We're very willing to do that, and I think that will create customers coming to us in the future. Integration is vital in that process. A bilateral construct would therefore be extremely helpful for both countries, where we can operate from different ends of the production chain. Vanessa mentioned a few moments ago that Australians are good at mining and the Indians are good at manufacturing. That's effectively another way of saying what I'm saying. In the battery and critical materials space, of the 10 broad production steps that need to happen between digging a mineral all the way to a final pack assembly, there's no reason why as Australians we can't adopt the first 3 of those steps and create precursor products in this country for lithium, for cobalt, for nickel, and create them at a specification that's meaningful to Indian consumers. At the same time, the Indian industry in batteries in particular is at a small stage. My understanding is there is some 44 gigawatt hours in development in India, which is relatively modest compared to global investment. But as they expand, both as a scale, but also expand upstream, it's important that we meet at some logical crossover point. And in our industry, that's all about the Indians making the battery componentry, electrodes and the like, and the Australian industry feeding those with precursor products. So that's really all I have to say in this opening address. I'm more than happy to take Q&A from that point. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for everyone for those opening comments. They were really insightful. Vanessa, there's a large endowment of critical minerals and a good potential there. What possibilities do you see for this sector in the next 5 to 10 years? And how do you really think practically? You know, you've talked about the models that didn't work. How should India engage with Australia and Australia engage in India to maximize that potential?
Yeah, thanks, John. And I think Joe's comments around the value chain actually are exactly where Australia and India can both participate in this. As you point out, Australia has a large endowment of almost every mineral that might be required to maintain the global economy today. And critical minerals, all of those are no exception. We hold something like 55% of the world's lithium, but we are almost 100% today dependent upon China as our major customer of that. China holds 63%, for example, of the world's output of rare earths. And some of that comes from Australia. But again, we are locked in to that market concentration. So while I would say it's important for Australian mining industry to not shun that relationship or not walk away from that relationship with China, because it is very important to us and to them. But if you step back from that, I think Joe is alluding, and look at the concentration risk or the market risk that this presents. Australia is highly dependent today on one customer. And so the opportunity that exists in the next 5 to 10 years for both Australia and for India is to actually open up that corridor in bilateral, as Joe points out, rather than spot cargo markets, but actually in one-to-one, deep and meaningful long-term relationships that actually create a reliable supply chain, value chain, right from the dirt in the ground to the wind farm or the battery. Joe, I think, has laid out very clearly how that value chain exists and where Australia plays its best strengths and where India can play its best strengths. That is not to say that that's the space where we should stay. I think the importance for us is that Indian businesses can get involved by actually understanding what they do best, building a great relationship with Australian companies that in what they do best, and then working out how we can learn from each other, both to increase the manufacturing sector delivery in Australia, but also to enable India, under that context of being self-reliant in the global economy, of understanding how they can build a strong and robust, sustainable mining industry within their own country on the back of the skills and expertise that Australia can bring. So when we talk about a partnership of Australia and India on, say, one critical mineral, it's not just the mineral that forms the basis of that relationship. It's the knowledge of the market, it's the skills and expertise. It can be much broader than that in terms of how we do business together. I think that's the difference in the model that Australian mining companies need to get into their heads around how to enter the Indian market. It's a patient one-to-one relationship construct that will actually create the best value for both countries.
Thank you, Vanessa. Rajesh, we're talking about the manufacturing sector in India, that there is this complementarity between Australia and India, with Australia having a supply of critical minerals and India requiring them. I guess at a more granular level, where do you see the demand for critical minerals coming from in India over the next 10 years specifically? We're on mute again.
Sorry,
we got Rajesh
I had
there?
partly discussed this in my earlier comments, where I had mentioned that India is moving fast on two things: A, the clean energy, as well as the high-tech technology. So where I see the demand coming from, let's say cobalt, for example, the demand for cobalt is likely to increase as the demand for, say, cutting tools, catalysts in petrochemicals, paints, jet engine parts, rechargeable batteries for electric vehicles, mobile phones, and superalloys increase over a period of, because we're moving into the 21st century production manufacturing regime. Lithium, for example, is our biggest import, not as lithium, but in lithium, but rather than lithium-ion batteries. And with given that India is moving very fast towards clean energy, and the Prime Minister has already declared that by 2022 or 2030, we will have 500 gigawatts of clean energy, and we would obviously need these lithium and batteries. And better would be what my earlier speakers have said, to do these things in India, to have a manufacturing setup in India. Indian companies have announced some plans, and there is some lithium-ion discoveries, deposits in south of India very recently. Finally, I think titanium is going to be used for chemical industry, space sector, power generation, and atomic energy. And rare earths are obviously used in multiple products, including IT and high-tech products. I think that will be my brief answer to this.
Yeah, Rajesh, I'm interested in maybe expanding a little bit more on, you touched in your opening remarks, but as well as now on the reforms in the Indian mining sector, and you identified these resources down in the south of India with potential for development. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how those reforms will impact on the foreign investors into India?
Yes, I will. I think I'm on this time. So
yes.
So I think I
yes.
will define or outline some of the reforms that were ongoing through the National Mineral Policy, which was announced in 2019. That is pre-COVID, but post-COVID, with the new set of reforms, I think we are going to move in a direction where we had not earlier been to, and hence the companies or the exploration companies which had come to India and had left probably would have a much better opportunity to be working in India. The first important thing I would like to say is that Indian geology is quite similar to Western Australia and maybe Africa, and there is a lot to be done on reconnaissance as well as exploration. So that is the first point that I would like to mention, that there is a huge scope of new exploration that Australian companies can help India with. The second one would be the actual extraction processes once discovered. And I'm not limiting myself to just critical minerals, but obviously the discussion I would take towards the critical minerals only. So first of all, there is a new announcement which says that introduction of a seamless composite exploration come mining come production regime. So since 2015, I understand that with the new regime coming for auctions, the composite licenses were not being given. So explorers and juniors were not very excited about working for exploration. I think this is going to be a big field. Then the second point I thought I would like to mention is that something that there has been the post-auction regime 2015. Auction regime have the experience of very high bids, and hence the reason was that many of these mines, when the auction bids were put, they were captive mines. So they put auctions as high as 80% of 90% of the resource value, which would now be done away with because the distinction has been done away between the captive and the merchant mines. Thirdly, I think National Mineral Policy has very clearly said that the licenses would now be given, and that is surely going to be implemented very soon, with pre-embedded clearances, so that the time taken between the lease to be given and actual production takes place is the government is trying its best to reduce that. So these multiple reforms that are now coming into picture are different from how we operated 2015 to maybe 2019. I think I'll stop here on this question.
Yeah, that sounds really encouraging, and we hope to see that in the coming years that there are some successful examples of investment into mines in India that turn into production. Joe, batteries is something we've been talking about, renewable energy as one of the really key applications for critical minerals, and these are things that are going to change societies. So what trends are you seeing in the battery technologies that will change economic and societal behavior over the next decade, and how can India take part in its transition?
Yeah, look, thank you for the question. I think what we're seeing today is effectively a transition point in consumer behaviour when it comes to, and I'll focus on electric vehicles for this particular answer. But what we've seen is a gradual transition towards adoption. There's been a number of consumer prerequisites to that adoption, and in the last 12 months or so, we've seen those largely being satisfied. So, for example, today there's around 450 models, believe it or not, globally of various flavours of electric vehicles. And because they're being produced by brands which consumers understand and know, the switch from an ICE, internal combustion engine, into an EV has been largely comforted by that. But certainly in the last 10 years, that's a major transition. So 10 years ago, the average electric vehicle was priced way out of consumers' pockets, was at one end. At the other end was a mass market vehicle that was a very cheap first to market product, which often disappointed. And what we've seen is a huge transition now into consumer take-up. So cost is approaching parity. I'll touch on cost shortly within the Indian context, but cost is gradually approaching parity. The range anxiety issues are starting to go away with customers now getting a sufficient range, infrastructure's rolling out, and all of those other non-monetary benefits that go with rollout, such as lane privileges, parking, etc. But all of those globally are in place. And what we're seeing now is the first set of consumer trends in the world, and I've no doubt the Indian consumer will follow these, is where if given a like-for-like choice, consumers will today preference an electric vehicle. And that's a very profound transition point. However, in India specifically, batteries remain very expensive. And as part of the bill of materials for an EV, they can be up to 25 or 30%. And if you've got an expensive battery, then automatically you've got an expensive product offering into the mass market. So those companies in India which are taking those initial steps towards fully electric vehicles, the Heros, the Tatas, the Mahindras of the world, they're being laboured with very expensive batteries from a start point. And part of the key reason for that, or one of the key reasons for that, is aside from having a small industry, India is very focused on the very last step of the industry, as I mentioned earlier, that's cell to pack. In other words, by forfeiting the entirety of the upstream, they're forfeiting those margins. And as a result, their cost of materials into those builds are higher than they otherwise should be. As touched on earlier, with a significant amount of processing done in East Asia, particularly via one country, and in cobalt terms, that's 80% of the market, you lose that margin, you lose the ability to create a specification which suits your product. And in EVs and even in energy storage terms broadly, these are highly customised batteries. You can't just walk off the shelf and try and get a one-size-fits-all. So you're losing product spec, you're losing control of the supply chain, you're certainly giving away a lot of margin. And the other issue in cobalt terms in particular is you don't know what the ethical origin of that cobalt is. And as Australians, we've got a fundamental, very position to play here. We can supply those products with a secure chain of custody all the way into the Indian market. And as I mentioned before, it's about a barbell where both sides try to meet in the middle. So what I'm seeing at the moment is a tremendous pickup rate. That'll be accelerated by COVID because what we're seeing globally is subsidies being offered for auto take-up, particularly electric vehicles, because the consumer hip pocket has been affected so badly by COVID. We're also seeing governments bail out automakers globally. And that taxpayer money will be directed towards future-proofing those industries. So by necessity, government or taxpayer money is being used today to retool industries to make electric vehicles. And I would put to you, that's being done at a point that those company managements would probably not have arrived at for another couple of years, let alone had the capital to deploy to create that retooling. So globally, we're seeing a tremendous catalyst for battery take-up in EVs. There's a similar, certainly a similar story I can paint with energy storage devices for slightly different drivers. So overall, I see some tremendous trends happening globally. I see some tremendous opportunities in India. And I think key part of that opportunity in India is the cost proposition, which starts with the battery pack. And that's where Australia can help. And if Australians can provide a high-spec battery precursor product, I've no doubt that world-class Indian engineering can do the rest and create a valuable consumer and industrial product from that. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. That was Joe. That was really interesting. We earlier in the discussion, Vanessa, you talked about the India economic strategy. I think Rajesh, you also mentioned it as well. And one of the things that was identified there was that Australian boardrooms didn't have a great really understanding of India, and Indian boardrooms the same of Australia. So today, as of 2020, Vanessa, broadly speaking, where does India sit in the priorities and the understanding of Australian boardrooms? And specifically, how does the resources sector think about India?
Thanks, John. Look, I think it's fair to say that the boardrooms that I have been in, and I can't speak for every sector in the economy, but I'm broadly in the manufacturing, materials, industrials and mining sectors, India is seen as a market, both from a demand point of view, but also from an investment point of view, which is absolutely full of potential, but quite a nascent market, one that we just, any time a company has attempted to get traction in India, it's been a slow burn. They haven't really been able to get traction. And so because of the other pressures on boards, in particular around the timing, the long investment horizons, and the pressure to shorten and produce returns for your shareholders, it leads boards and companies to say, to run out of patience essentially and say it's just too hard to do business in India because it takes too long. Now, I have to remind myself all the time of growing up in the 60s and 70s that this was a comment I heard around the dinner table about Japan when Australia was building deep and meaningful trade relationships with Japan. It's just too hard to do business with Japan because we don't think like they do. And during the early 1990s, I recall having the same conversations as a mine manager about China. It's just too hard to do business with China because we don't understand how they work. So I have the view that India and the boardrooms I sit in, India is a country full of potential for markets for us as a customer market, as a destination for investment, and also as a country which, as Joe has pointed out in battery technology in particular, but in other technology, high advanced manufacturing pathways, where we can partner very well on the back of what we bring to the table and what Indian markets can. But it will take patient and persistent relationship building on a one-to-one basis in India for Australian companies. And so I do think it's full of opportunity. Boardrooms see it as full of opportunity, but I don't think anybody has yet quite cracked the code of how to build those relationships with partners in India that will then release the value in the long term.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's really interesting insight you have there. And as a trade commissioner in India from 2016 to 2 months ago, I can say that during my time there, certainly I saw the at least understanding within Australian boardrooms that they needed to know more about India certainly come to the fore, and it looks very different today than it did even a couple of years ago. Rajesh,
and John,
Australia and India.
John, to add to that,
sorry.
And to add to that, I think we also understand better the more time you spend in India, the better you understand it. And we also have to, there is not such a cultural divide between Australia and India. We operate under the same rule of law. We operate with a similar political structure, albeit somewhat far more complex in India because of the population and number of states. So it's actually not that foreign to us, but it's about patiently spending some time to understand it.
Yes, great, thank you. Rajesh, turning to this critical minerals memorandum of understanding signed between Australia and India only last month, talk the geostrategic motivations of the government of India in seeking better access to Australian critical minerals?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think I'll take it forward from where Vanessa has left. There is one difference between what the experience of Australian probably companies has been in as far as the mining is concerned till, let's say, last year, with a game-changing statement coming directly from the Prime Minister, as well as the MOU that has been signed very recently, and the major reforms that have been, so we are following up on the reforms that, which talk about the reducing the time period for starting the extraction process, that is EIA bill. Then we have also talked about, more efficiency as far as the auction process is concerned, distinction between the final and use has been done away with. So I think I will take just 3 cues from the MOU that has been signed, that it very clearly says that information sharing between both countries, which is very important, so that this has both the speakers have already said that that information is important. So first bullet I would like to mention is the information sharing between both countries. Second, the MOU also mentioned connecting research institutions and universities. So that is the second important point where probably we might have missed earlier. And third, collaborating on actions to support stable, secure, and resilient supply chains for critical and strategic minerals. I think this is coming from the geopolitical discussions or discussion that we had in brief about the monopolies being set up in certain countries, and one shock can completely fracture the supply chain. Last point, I think the Indian government has also set up a special body called KABIL, Khanij Videsh India Limited, which is a setup of 3 companies taken together: Nalco, Aluminium, Hindustan Copper Limited, and Mineral Exploration Company, MECL. They have been tasked especially to look for what has been discussed in our discussion today, critical minerals, either get the critical minerals from abroad or also search for opportunities for investment in cobalt and lithium mines elsewhere. And it would also work towards acquisition, exploration, mining, and processing of strategic minerals in other countries. That's what I'm saying, for ensuring adequate supplies to the domestic markets. And this would be government-to-government collaboration. The only thing I'm suggesting is that, and there has been said earlier also, that probably they can take some major private companies along while the discussions are on. So I do see silver lining on the issue of critical minerals with establishment of a special body called CobaltBlue. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Rajesh. Joe, one last question, and then we're running out of time, so maybe if I can ask you to keep it brief. You talked about where Australia and India can cooperate on the battery technology production chain. Is the capital available within the Australian and Indian side, in your view, to make these investments to get that sector moving?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is certainly the capital is available, but it is hiding behind hurdles which I think are artifices until we really, again, start to understand each other's needs, the up and the downstream. So the reluctance to lend in Australia to that development is really the reluctance of commercial banks, industrial banks, to not take risk on exposures they've never had historically, because in our case, we're a pure play cobalt mine. That's almost an unheard of thing. But even the lithium guys, again, to come into the market and trying to get that development capital, it's there, but it's intermediated by risk-adverse decision makers. And the way to get ahead of that is to, again, create an understanding with the downstream. On the Indian side, as we're seeing, I think broadly across Asia, for every dollar we spend in our end of the market, the downstream battery industry has to spend about 20, to give you some idea. So theirs is the capital intensive end, but that money is being deployed and deployed successfully in countries, and we're seeing that in India. But it will remain difficult to deploy in that quantities and certainly satisfy domestic demand unless the technology is a leading edge, because as I mentioned earlier, the evolution is so fast, and it will remain difficult to deploy unless they know exactly or they have a security of supply understanding with their upstream. And the current processing or going through East Asia, getting washed into refining industries there and then coming across is not working for that security of supply and that investment risk that they need to overcome. So I would say the money is there. It's disintermediated from how it should be. And I think there is certainly a way ahead with us by that communication that we've talked about and that understanding.
Great, thank you, Joe. Well, look, what I think is clear from our discussion today is that there is more to be done between Australia and India on the critical minerals space. Economic and technological growth will be driven by critical minerals, so they are just as sure. Right. COVID-19 has shown that economies should not be over-reliant on a single source of supply. So as India will be a big consumer of these critical minerals going forward, she'll need to lock in a diversity of supply as well as develop their own value chain for success. Australia is an obvious partner for India in this and many other endeavours, and the improved relationship at the strategic level hopefully will show business the way, and we may see closer collaboration across all areas as well as critical minerals. So I would like to thank our panelists today, Dr. Vanessa Guthrie, Dr. Rajesh Chadha, and Joe Katarevec, for a fantastic discussion. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for being part of this today, and hope you enjoyed this and enjoy the rest of the India Global Week 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste, hello, and welcome to India Global Week. Be the Revival, India and a Better New World. That was a great session. I want to give a huge thanks to the panel as well as the moderator. It's really interesting to see critical minerals and how they can usher new opportunities and ties between Australia and India. With that being said, if there's any questions, any thoughts on this conference, be sure to send them in on social media. Use the hashtag #BeTheRevival and follow us on India Inc. Corp. That's at India INCORP on Twitter. We're looking forward from you, and I believe the audience is huge. The stat, this morning was over 10,000 registered attendees from 69 countries. So as Manoj said, what a better platform. There can be no better platform to engage and collaborate and make an impact, as we can see from these panel discussions. With that being said, we're going to take a short break here on India Global Week Day 2. This break is going to be for 30 minutes. So that is 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. BST, 2 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. IST. And I believe that's Sydney time, 6:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. We have a half an hour break. We'll see you after. Stay tuned for more exciting panel discussions, keynotes, and some very special guests coming up. I can't wait. I'm really, really honored to host this. We'll see you soon on India Global Week. This is Priyanka Deo. See you in a bit.